Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Benson. I'm that guy up there in the corner. My background started in urban planning and started building big things. So I built the light rail systems in Seattle and Portland and Phoenix and Taipei and other cities and large freeways, things like that. Both for agencies and as a consulting engineer. One day I got really fed up and I went and started a software company to make software for government, to get government to be both more collaborative and better stewards of their data. And that's a very long story. So if anybody ever wants to hear it, they can just ask. But we did that. So in 1999, one of my colleagues, William Rowden, and I started a company called Gray Hill Solutions, and all of our clients were government, and we were an all Agile shop. So starting from the very earliest moments of the 21st century, we were getting WashDOT and the city of Seattle and Phoenix and San Francisco, Los Angeles to write us contracts that were all Agile contracts. We've been doing Agile for a long time. Long enough to completely love it and completely despise it. There are things about Agile that I think are wonderful and things about Agile that I think don't work very well. And we'll talk a little bit about those things and how they led to the creation of Personal Kanban and what Personal Kanban is and how you can use it to make your Agile stuff more Agile. So, for me, when I look at Agile, I get frustrated because a lot of people see the trappings of Agile. They see iterations and time boxing and story points and stand-up meetings and product owners and scrum masters, and they confuse this with what Agile really is. And Agile is actually just a set of principles that make us communicate and collaborate better. And so we basically want Agile teams to be flexible and adaptable, and as the thing says, individuals' interactions over processes and tools. I have a long rant about that particular statement because I don't think it's really accurate, but this is, for me, kind of the core of what we want from Agile. Lean, on the other hand, we want is more focused on respect and being able to know what your work is and make changes as necessary by understanding what's happening and how it's happening and what issues are stopping us from being able to complete with quality. So when we started to notice that certain elements of Agile weren't working quite right for us or for most other people, we started to ask ourselves, what is it that Agile was supposed to do, and why isn't it doing it for us? And how can we get around that? How can we retain the good things of Agile and get rid of some of the frustrating things? And so one of the things that we realized was that at its core, Agile is trying to make us and the people around us understand what IT and software development are. What the variation is in software projects, what are the things that happen that we don't expect? How often does change occur in the project? How can we plan in highly chaotic and difficult environments? How can we better understand our work so that we can be, if not more predictable, at least clearer in how we're unpredictable? So we realized that the two things that we really needed to do was be able to show our work to other people and to ourselves, and to limit our own work in progress such that we could focus on what we were doing. So those kind of became our two rules for Personal Kanban. The first one is visualize your work because you can better manage what you can see. And the second is to limit your work in progress because we can't do more work than we can handle. And even with Agile methodologies, we weren't doing a good job at either of these things. So we'd like to think that iterations allow us to limit our work in progress and focus, but that actually doesn't seem to work out without some additional aids. So what does Personal Kanban look like? Let's take a look here. So let me change the other monitor. There we go. And so here we have the board for this particular talk. So we've done the introduction, we've done what is Agile. Talk a little bit right now about knowledge work. So knowledge work generally is invisible. We can't see the work that we're doing. So when we're coding, that stuff comes out of our head, goes into the machine. The machine interprets it and turns it into something that's sort of visible but still pretty ethereal. It's very difficult for us to communicate the substance of our work, the weight of our work, and the difficulty of our work to other people because it's invisible. So that's why we want to visualize our work. Knowledge work also entirely comes from our brains. Our brains are the things that are creating what we're doing. And so what we want to do is make sure that the people who are doing the software development or the IT work, that they have the best working conditions possible, because if they're upset and frustrated, the code that they write is going to be upset and frustrated. Technical debt is created from our own scattered understandings of our work. So let's take a look really quickly at a board that would be for a group. So here we have a set of user stories over here in the ready column. Those are things that are ready to be done. And here we have some things that are being done by the coders. And when they finish something, they simply pull a new thing in until their work is done. Now, usually teams that we're working with when they start with this are just simply using Post-it notes on a whiteboard, so you'll create the board on the whiteboard. This top part here, across ready, coding, testing, integration, and release, that is called a value stream. And the value stream are the steps that your particular team takes to create value. And it varies from team to team. It varies from project to project. It varies based on what the context is at the time. So one of the things that we want from the value stream is to show the flow of work, but the other thing that we want it to do is tell the story of how work flows through the system. So before we had something like this, the coders would be focused on coding, the testers would be focused on testing, and when something made this movement from coding complete into testing, that's been thrown over the wall, and then as a coder, you can't see it anymore, which makes you as a coder focus on your coding silo and assume that there's a testing silo and that those two things don't meet, right? And so what we wanted to do was say, you know what, software development is a process, it's a thing in and of itself, it includes all of these different elements. And the more information the coders have about what the testers are doing and the testers have about what the coders are doing, the more context they're going to have and the better job they're going to do. So one of the things that we found was that, at Gray Hill, we've gone to great lengths to hire good people. We wanted to hire good people. But we noticed almost immediately that once we put up a board, our less good people, such that they were called or known as, started to do really well. And we realized that our good coders actually didn't write better code than our poor coders. We actually realized that the real division was that the good coders would go out and get the information that they needed. They would go out and get the context that they needed. And what we wanted to do with the board is say, okay, you know what? Now everybody has the context. They can see what everybody's working on. They can see what's coming up. They can see when things are completed and how they're completed and how they flow across the board. And this creates a rich story for everybody. I've got tons of anecdotes about that. So what we've done now is we've created a system where everybody sees the work, they see the rate at which it flows across the board, and they understand when things are stuck, and they also understand, so let's say that this gets done, and somebody reaches over here and pulls this in, and say, you know, like my colleague Tony Ann pulls this into doing, and I look over and I say, hey, you know what? I did something like this yesterday. If you go and Google that, you'll save like 4 hours worth of work. And between me and Tony Ann, that's just human courtesy. But to the state or to our company, that's like a half day's worth of work that just got saved. To our team being able to complete something, that's a half day's worth of work that we've just saved. So, and we've built goodwill between each other. And the only reason I was able to do that is because I could see that she had pulled that ticket in. So it's really important for us to understand not only what we're doing, but what other people are doing as well. Further, let's use this one because it's a smaller column. So before we could see our work, what would happen is work would build up all the way down that doing column. So there'd be 20, 25 tickets maybe in there of things that people were working on. When that happens, we're overloading people and we're overloading the system. And so just like when you have a freeway, and that freeway has like 45% capacity, it's running at 45% capacity, traffic's going to be moving pretty well. Things are going to be flowing through. It's going to be a nice rate of cars flowing through. When you get to 55, 60%, you're going to get rolling slowdowns from place to place because some people drive faster than other people. Some people drive slower than other people. Some people change lanes a lot. Some people are going to be aggressive. Some people have a good gap tolerance. Other people like to be right on other people's butts. And that variation causes breakdowns in the transportation system, even though there's still up to 45% capacity left, theoretically, in the roadway. Our work is the same way. We like to think that our work fits into a space and time, so we like try and fit it into a 2-week iteration or by a deadline, but our work actually flows like traffic. So when we smash a bunch of work into a given point in time, our attention is drawn constantly to the different tasks that we're working on. We're engaged in context switching. We slow down. When we start to have meetings to negotiate the transaction costs between all of the things that we're working on at once. When we limit our work in progress, we've now created an economy where we say, okay, you know what? I can only have 3 things that I'm doing at any given point in time. And when I'm done with something, then I can pull something else in. So if there's a bunch of things over here, let's put a bunch of things here real quick. I finish this, and now I can, oops, see what happens when you exceed your whip limit? I finish this, and now I go over here to pull something else in. I look over here and I say, okay, which of these things is the most important thing for me to be starting right now? Because it's basically 1/3 of all of the things that the testers could possibly be doing. So reach over here, figure out what the most important thing is, and we pull it in. So we start to engage in dynamic prioritization. And dynamic prioritization works a lot better for everybody that's involved than planning up front. Even if it's something as small as sprint planning, managing for flow, just like in a roadway, operating with understanding that there's a capacity of the system, and then working to optimize the flow of that system is optimizing the way that work is done. Oh, I did it again. You can see there that it doesn't want me to exceed my whip limit. So let's go back up here. Oh. Interface is different than, it's funny, I did a webinar yesterday with exactly the same service, but completely different interface. So, as I mentioned before, software and IAT is knowledge work. The work itself is invisible. So even if we put it into something like an Agile lifecycle management tool, an ALM tool, which could be like TFS, or Rally, or version 1, or Pivotal. What happens is we see a lift of the features that we're going to work on, and we see that list as a list that's in order, right? Maybe it's in order, maybe it's not. If I show you a map of Western Washington, you're going to know where all of the water is, where the political jurisdictions are, where the roadways are, where there's probably congestion on a daily basis, where there's rivers and whatnot. You're going to know that immediately because our brains are mostly devoted to the processing of visual information. We're highly visual people. And so when we create a Kanban, what we're creating is a map of our work. We're creating a view into our work where we're able to see what's happening, who's doing it, where it came from, what's completed, and what's bothering us right now. We'll see breakdowns in our workflow that show up as bottlenecks, which will show up as tickets, stuck in some area. We'll see where there's complex problems because tickets won't move. We'll see a rich amount of information at a glance. Whereas if I listed out for you all the roadways and political jurisdictions and riparian areas and whatnot in Western Washington, you'd see this massive list. It would take you forever to read. And even when you completed it, you wouldn't know how anything related to each other. So what we want to do is we want to build a highly contextual visual control that allows us to manage our work. And we want to do that because we want to avoid these negative impacts of knowledge work. We want to make our work visible. We want to depoliticize it by taking it out of my mouth and putting it on the board. So we tell people you can't yell at a board with sticky notes on it, but you sure as heck can yell at somebody else, right? So we want to make sure that when we are communicating our workload or our overwork or what our projected completion times are going to be, that what we're using some external visual system that makes us talk about the system and not about the people. Therefore, we're communicating better, we're estimating better, and we're slowing down because of the WIP limit, which allow us to focus on individual pieces of work. When we focus more, we complete with better quality, we have less rework, we have less bugs, we have less technical debt. So Agile and Lean both combine to encourage us to be aware of what we're doing, to understand our domain, and to stop taking either the bad actions of other people who are giving us work or other systems that we're attached to for granted. So when there are changes in external context, we want to be able to react elegantly to them. Both Agile and Lean also encourage us to make the smallest plans possible and to make the smallest plans frequently. And we can do that, as Agile does it by doing it every iteration, every week or every 2 weeks or every month. Or we can do it in a Lean way, which is basically doing it continuously. And we can talk about that more later. So psychology plays a big part of this because, as I said, the work is being done by people. So programming is actually done by humans. It's not done by machines. And it's done by humans who have to think really hard about every single line of code that they write. So this is different than developing the perfect assembly line for something physical, because the acts in creating something physical are often repetitive unless it's a highly creative physical object that you're creating. By and large, the thing is you have a set of activities that you are following, and those activities have been written up by somebody else, and your job is basically to make sure that any improvements that you make are improving on that list. It's not radically altering the way that things are created. In software development, we are constantly making decisions. We're making decisions about what code to write, what code not to write. when to refactor, when to do unit tests, when to meet, when you need help from other people, when collaboration is necessary, how much you understand the user story or the feature as it's been described to you, how often to meet with your colleagues and your customers. Lots and lots of very difficult things to think about. And so we are directly taxing people's brains, and that is a psychological, I don't know, nightmare almost. And so in psychology, there are things called cognitive biases, and cognitive biases are basically shortcuts that our brains take to make decisions, because if it isn't, then we have to make decisions about absolutely everything we saw all the time. And so these allow us to have faster paths between seeing something and making a determination about how to deal with them. And that's very positive, because without it we go crazy. But it's also negative because we become overly reliant on it. And there are, if you go to Wikipedia and type in list of cognitive biases, you'll find that there's over 160 of them. So there's tons of them, and we all suffer from all of them at one time or another. But today I'm just going to talk about 4. The first one is called planning fallacy, and it's one of the most important ones. It says basically that we're really lousy at planning. And the planning fallacy is governed by something called Hofstadter's law, which says that human beings will underestimate any complex task, even if they are aware of Hofstadter's law. And that's a big thing. So being aware of cognitive biases does not make them immune from them. And so the planning fallacy has been tested it's multicultural, it's been tested around the world, it's been tested, you know, in different genders, different ages. People universally tend to underestimate tasks. So if we think about the amount of time that we spend right now estimating the work that we're doing, that's a sobering thought. So we'll talk a little bit about how personal online can help with that. The second bit is fundamental attribution error. And this is basically blaming the last person with something for its state. So you are a coder, you do a bunch of work coding, you throw the stuff over the wall, and the tester starts testing, and then you throw something up over the wall, and something else over the wall, and something else over the wall, and something else over the wall, and the tester can't keep up, partially because you've written crappy code, partially because their testing environment isn't good, and partially because there's like 35 coders and 2 testers. And but as a coder, you don't know that. You just know that you worked really hard on some code, you threw it over the wall, and then it didn't get to release, and you didn't make the sprint goals. And so you're upset. And so you go over and start yelling that the testers are lazy and stupid and they can't get their job done. That's fundamental attribution error. The issue usually doesn't have anything to do with how lazy or talented the testers are. It has more to do with the system that we've set up and how the testers are ingesting work, and there's probably much better ways for us to feed work to them. Okay, the third one is loss aversion, and loss aversion is basically sunk cost fallacy. So we'll start to put work into something, and the more work we put into it, the more ownership we feel of it, and then if it's not completed, we get upset. And so oftentimes in software, either us or the people who have hired us will demand that we complete entire feature sets even when those feature sets aren't necessary. So we spend a lot of time missing deadlines, missing sprint goals, missing releases because we have to get that last feature out that didn't matter to anybody. So we want to make sure that what we're building is the right thing, and that we have some systems that point out to us, you know what, I know as a person you want to get that work out because you're a professional and you started on it, but it actually doesn't have any value to anybody, or it could come out in the next release. It's not that important right now. The last one is expectation bias. And expectation bias tells us that when we when we set up an experiment, we do so with some desires for that experiment. and then we write an experiment basically to support our own worldview. We write experiments to prove what we want to have proven. And this extends to we interpret data in the way that we would like to interpret that data. And this is really important for software developers because we are constantly setting up systems to measure our awesomeness, for lack of a better word, and they're all what Eric Ries would call vanity metrics. They're all metrics that that prove only that we're great, but wouldn't ever disprove anything. Velocity, which is a major metric of Agile, is extremely guilty of this. So let's go back over to the board really quickly, and we'll talk about what the board can do for us about this. So here, so the first one is the planning fallacy. And since we've set up these WIP limits, what we've done is we've created a healthy constraint. We've lowered the amount of things that we can be doing at any given point in time, which, as I said, helps us focus. But what it also does is it creates flow. So if we don't have work in progress limits, then we just start doing everything at once, and it's like a flood. We have a flood of work, and we spend a lot of our time managing the transaction costs between the things that we have in flight. But when we slow down and just do a few things at a time, our rate of completion goes up, and sorry about that. Our rate of completion goes up, and our attention that we're paying to each thing also increases. So we complete faster, and we complete with higher quality. So there was a group that we were working with in Wisconsin, and they had they had 15 teams worth of people, and so I went in and I started going to their stand-up meetings, and it seemed to be going okay. But all of a sudden I noticed that I was seeing teams that were completely comprised of people that I'd seen in other teams. And so I said, how many projects are you guys working on? And they said, not that many, like 4 or 5. So that meant that every day they were going to 4 or 5 stand-up meetings. Every Monday they were participating in 4 or 5 planning meetings, or every other Monday. And the result of that was that they were so busy managing each of the projects that they weren't getting any work done. So they had all these 3-month projects in this company set up, and a lot of them were 9 to 12 months late. So you had a 3-month project that was 300 or 400% late. And so the question, so I told them, I said, you know, if you stopped doing some of these projects and just got to them later, you could actually finish some of these things. That was an incredibly hard message for them to receive. I could go into the whole story, but in the end they did receive it, and they went from releasing something as 15 teams, the aggregate of them, they were releasing something about every 6 to 8 weeks. And projects themselves were taking, you know, about 12 months to finish. They went from that to completing things most of the teams were releasing weekly. And it's simply because if you're doing too much stuff, you work more slowly. But now that we've built a flow where these tickets are flowing across the board, this movement from ready into an active state and to complete, this is a measurable period of time. This is a real live period of time that we're measuring. So as something moves from ready into doing and through the system and to complete, to release, that's called cycle time. And it's a real live number made of real movement, of real work by real people. So if we use that number, if we say, you know, my average cycle time, or my cycle time is anything you give me Once it starts working, we will complete it in 2 weeks or less. Now all of a sudden, you have a real number that you can give to somebody about how long it takes your team to complete work. And what we're going to get hung up in here is sizing, because sizing was very important. Sizing is very important in Agile because we're trying to smash things into a 2-week increment. So we're trying to force work to fit. And when we try and force work to fit, it's just like trying to fit 100% of capacity of a roadway, of cars onto that roadway, and then try and get them to flow. So what we would like to do, so in a lean model, in an Agile lean model, we no longer care about the size of the story, because when all of these things end up over here in complete, or as more and more things end up in complete, what we're doing is we're building a large data set of how long it takes us to complete just about anything. And that allows us to run a statistical analysis against that, and that tells us what our cycle time is. And our cycle time, therefore, is based on an aggregate number of all of the things that we complete, as opposed to trying to estimate every single thing. Because the planning fallacy tells us that if we estimate every single thing, we're going to be right about 80% of the time. And that sounds like a pretty good number. The problem is that we're going to be wrong about 20% of the time. And it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable because in software development, there's so much variation. That variation is natural. And therefore, what we estimate out to be a 1-point story will take 1 hour. The next one will take 1 hour. The next one will take 1 hour. The next one will take 4 hours. And the next one will take 16 hours. And that's a perfect Pareto distribution. And it's what happens all the time is that we're really good at doing some of them, and that makes us feel like we can get better. But the planning fallacy, cognitive psychology, is telling us specifically that we cannot. On the other hand, measuring this actual movement, measuring cycle time, is a statistical system. It's not asking us as individuals to draw on our brain power to guess how much time it's going to take us to do things. And that gives us a very real, very usable number. Very quickly here, I'll build up a nightmare for testing. So testing is sitting here, and they've got this horrible backlog. Let's break. There we go. We broke it. Bad things happen. And in this case, what's happened is testing is incredibly backed up. They've got too much work in their work in progress, and there's a bottleneck here. And now coding can't do any more work. And I'm saying that on purpose. Coding cannot do more work. The worst thing in the whole world that could happen right now in this situation when testing is backed up is that these guys keep coding, because they'll just stack more and more stuff up on this bottleneck, and that will slow down the process of completion even more, and it will increase defects for everybody. Part of the reason for that is that all of these things that have been completed, these are aging. So this was completed, the top one here was completed today, the next one was completed yesterday, and we go down the line until this bottom one here was maybe completed a week ago. When the coders are able to get to it, and they reach down and they pull this one, by the time they get to it, it's like 2-3 weeks old maybe. And there's a great deal of time between when this was written and when it was tested. That means that the memory of the people in coding is becoming hazier, and their ability to create a quick fix is becoming more and more impaired. So what happens is there's a bug here in user story 938, and it goes back to the people in coding, and then when they get it, they're like, oh man, what did I do? You know, how did I make this? I don't even remember how I made this. And then they will have to, you know, go through some series of exercises to figure that out. That's a slow, laborious process. The faster that work flows through this system, the faster the feedback loops are between coding and testing, and the more likely it is that we not only complete with quality, but that the relationship between testing and coding improves. Because before, like I mentioned, when we had this system where the work backed up, then coding is angry at testing because they're not working fast enough. Okay, so the real problems here may not be that testing's working fast enough. It might be that there was plenty of people in testing for the last 3 weeks, and this week somebody broke their leg and they're out. It may be that something happened in coding and what they're writing now is no longer easily testable. Now, there's any number of things that systemically or individually could be happening to cause this. So rather than blaming these people, which is the fundamental attribution error that I talked about, now we start to say things like, hey, we're seeing a backup here. You testing guys, are you okay? You know, do you need something? Can we stop coding for a couple of days and come over and help you test? Can we, you know, go for training for a couple of days and help you clean out the backlog? You know, what is it that you need and how can we help? So when we start visualizing the board, one of the other things that happens is we get empathy for the other people that we're actually working with, because we can see what's bothering them and we want to help. And because of loss aversion, the good part of it is I, as a coder, have a vested interest in the completion of this particular task here. And if it's stuck, I want to know about it so that I can help it get over here, because over here is now where I feel successful. So I know I've run over my time a little bit, so I'm gonna close up with that. There's a couple other things I wanted to get to, but the major thing that I want to show here is that last point I'd like to leave you with is that our first thing that we tell people about personal Kanban is draw the system to show what you're doing now, not what you wish you were doing. So draw the value stream, draw the responsibility to reflect what you're doing right now, and then watch what happens. See where work backs up, see where workflow is choppy, see where people are starved for work, and then start to figure out ways to make the system flow more smoothly. Okay. So, so that's it. Half an hour for something that we ordinarily teach a 2-day class or a 3-day class on is always a challenge, but there it is in a nutshell. Are there questions?
All right, thanks a lot, Jim. We will be taking questions over the chat window. If you want to send them directly to me, I can relay them to Jim. There's also should be a button on your WebEx presentation to raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question yourself. And then we can call on you, and that will unmute you and let you ask your question. So feel free to send them in. We'll give them just a minute to come in here. I had a question that was actually brewing while we wait. How does personal Kanban relate to Scrumban? I know there are a couple books that have been published about that.
Right. So Scrumban, when we wrote the first Scrumban book, Scrumban is the book itself is actually the Corey Lattice book. Scrumban is a book about how Corey personally transitioned from iterative systems to flow-based systems, and that's, you know, all process wonky. So the real thing is, you know, what realizations did he have to go through in order to move from one way of thinking to another? Most people use the word Scrumban to mean a hybrid of Scrum and Kanban. That's okay. Ultimately, Kanban is a tool and Scrum is a methodology. I would like to see more people talking about Kanban, but the notion of Scrum and Kanban working together is perfectly fine, because all Kanban is doing is visualizing, like I said a minute ago, what you're already doing. So if you're in a Scrum environment, just go ahead and visualize it this way, and make sure that you find a way to limit your work in progress. So the other day Tony and I were working with the Scrum team, and they said, we're doing Scrumban, look, we've got a Kanban, and it had WIP limits on it. And the WIP limits were being adhered to. And so coding had a WIP limit of 8, and they had 8 tickets. But then when I looked at the 8 tickets, 5 of them were being done by one guy. So the thing that I would say is that Scrum is a good way for you to communicate to your stakeholders that they can't pile work onto you without a conversation. But make sure that even if you're in Scrum, that you as an individual are limiting your work in progress, because you are the thing that's creating the value. The team is the thing that is enabling you to create value, but the individual WIP limits are incredibly important.
Great answer. Thank you very much. So we've got a question that's come in here from Jessica. She asks, do you think electronic Kanban boards are as successful as hard copy Kanbans done by hand and displayed for units to easily see?
Yeah, I love that question. So I use both. Obviously, I'm using an electronic one now because we're not in the same place. But right now on my desk is a Kanban. To the left of my computer, there's things that I need to do. The thing that I'm doing right now, the Have webinar, is actually stuck on my computer, and then the stuff I've completed is over on my right side. So I use physical systems every day. My team, however, is spread around the world. So for our team board, we use LeanKit, and I think really quickly I could show you that board. So this is the board that we used as a team. As you see, it's pretty complex, but there's a bunch of us doing a bunch of different things. We have our tasks up here. We have one of our book projects down here. And so we definitely use them both. And we use them both for specific reasons. For a team that's co-located, I would try as much as possible to hold on to the physical board as long as you possibly can, because the physical board does not allow you to minimize it, right? So you can't do this to a physical board. So it's always there, it's always in your face, and it's constantly radiating. This is what's happening, and this is how it's happening, and these are where things are breaking down, and you need to pay attention to that. And a lot of people will do electronic boards and put them up on like a 60-inch monitor. That's the second best, and that's okay. But being able to go up and have the tactile, physical relationship with the board is incredibly important. It's an incredible psychological tool of tying completion to a physical, tangible movement. When we move a ticket physically, that's a direct connection. It's a direct kinesthetic connection to our brain. And so we move it, and we kind of get this dopamine rush, and we're like, finishing stuff actually feels good. So I love physical boards. And I understand that there is a direct need for electronic boards. And also, I'm pretty amazed that since we started talking about this in 2005, there's over 30 companies now that are doing electronic boards, like actually making them. So that's not so bad for something that was a crazy idea doodled on a napkin in a pub in Magnolia in Seattle a couple of years ago.
All right, I got another question here. How long does a completed task stay in the done column before moving to archive?
Oh, brilliant. So what we do is every week we will, and I'll go ahead and use an example. Every week what we will do is we will say, okay, this week we did this, and that's cool, that's cool. Oh, wait, this was a horrible task. This was terrible. Can we talk about it? So what we'll do is we'll use these for our retrospective, and we'll do our retrospectives every week. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that there's another cognitive bias called rosy retrospection, where the longer we get away from an activity, the better we remember it. So if something was totally awful and it totally sucked, the next day we're going to be like, man, yesterday was horrible. And then a couple days later, we're like, oh, you know what, I lived through that. And a few weeks later, it's like, I'm awesome because I totally rocked that horrible experience. So when we put a long distance between our retrospective and the actual action, we limit the effectiveness of the retrospective. So, so we move things weekly, and as we move them as a group, we review them in a retrospective format. The other thing is that helps us not forget what we did, so this becomes a written record of what happened. Awesome question.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up, we have a question. Are there special considerations with regard to Kanban when it comes to the data, scope, and roles or responsibilities and constraints introduced by contracting or subcontracting? Are there better contracting structures that lend themselves to a Kanban or lean approach?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. Phil last week had a similar question, and I think that he struggled with it as I'm going to struggle with it. So this is what I'm going to say. When we had Gray Hill Solutions, our last project, not our last project, but one of our final projects, we did a very, very large traffic management system. So like the system that actually manages all of the signal timing, all of the things, all of the equipment in the roadway, all of the pedestrian actualization, all of the weather stations, everything that would be in a regional transportation network was controlled by the software that we were creating. And the way that we were building it and the client that we were building it for, or the way that we were building it was, had never been attempted before. And so we had the trust of the client, and what we had to tell them was, look, what we're going to do is we're going to put everything we're doing into this Kanban thing that we're experimenting with. This was like 2004, 2005. This Kanban thing that we're experimenting with, we're going to put this up online, and every day you're going to come to our stand-up meetings, and you, the client, are going to make decisions with us. And they were very unhappy about that. And I said, and the other thing is, we're not going to have any project manager, and we're not going to have a product manager. So you have direct access to our developers. Our developers didn't like that. So everybody was afraid that everybody was going to bother everybody else. But what we found was when the Kanban got up, the level of information that was created was so rich that everybody got what they needed. The number of status meetings went down, the rate of completion went up, the check-ins became more fast, and because the feedback loops were so immediate, we never had an issue with them for anything around the contract. We said, give us a maximum burn rate, which we never even met, let alone exceeded. And we beat every deadline that they set up to the point that they stopped giving us deadlines. They're like, okay, we just trust you now. So with government, it's tough because what I'd imagine is that the people that I'm speaking to today have a lot of internal government projects. And those internal government projects are going to have a lot of different funding sources, levels of oversight, and operational imperatives. And those three things, and I guess, are politicized in different ways. So those four things are going to combine to create very sticky contractual relationships that you have. So what I would say is take whatever contractual format that particular project is coming to you with, be that governed by the agency or by the people involved or the funding mechanism or whatever. Take that and look through it and find the holes where you can increase the amount of communication between you and the people that you're working for. And do it in a way that never use the word Agile, never use the word iteration, never use the word Scrum, never use the word Kanban, never use the word Lean. Just make it look like you are trying to be more responsive. And the better you get at writing responsive contracts or augmenting contracts that are responsive, the more truly Agile or truly Lean you'll be. But don't go in and say, I'm Agile or I'm Lean, and therefore you must now conform to me. Because I think, as we've all probably experienced more times than we care to think about, that will put people on the defensive. It will make them wonder why you're trying to do something weird with their project, and then conversations will break down. So find out what they're scared about, and then increase the amount of communication you can give them such that they won't be scared. Then you will have written a good contract. Can the person that asked that question verify to Justin that that was an appropriate answer?
All right, I will keep an eye out for their response. Oh, and Sean says, yes, thank you.
Awesome, awesome.
All right, so moving on to the next question. We have a question from one of our state's enterprise lean consultants, Daryl, and he asks, do you have any general words of encouragement for Washington state government leaders and employees on the lean journey?
Hey, Daryl. Wow. Can I give a word of encouragement without proselytizing? As I've discussed with Daryl, the lean journey in government is a difficult one because the word lean is becoming politically charged itself. Now there's a lot of hope, a lot of fear, and a lot of potential finger pointing. I thought you were going to be lean. Why did this still go over budget? Type of things that are going on. So I guess that's the pessimistic thing. The optimistic thing is that what I've seen over the last couple of years in touching lean in government in general is that two things. One, people in government are getting a newfound hope that they can actually achieve the missions of their organization because they now have greater agency and greater control over improving things that have been broken for a long time. The second thing is that the more that we as lean and agile practitioners can increase the flow of beneficial information and transparency throughout our teams, starting at our teams and working our way out, the more self-aware the teams, the groups, the agencies, and the government's going to be in general, and the better we're going to be able in the future to weather the attacks of a generally distrusting populace. And we can, point to successes and hopefully make people feel better about things, especially some of the more visible ones. But the hope that I'm feeling from the people that I'm working with is with more than a little bit of relief, and that's a wonderful thing to experience.
Okay, we don't have any questions backlogged. We got about 5 minutes left, so there is time for another question or two if anyone wants to send one in. And while we're waiting, oh, let's see. Yep, let's see if we have anyone raising their hand. I don't believe we do. So while we're waiting, I had a question about the structure of Kanban inside of something like Scrum. You mentioned people working across multiple projects. Would you generally keep it in one Kanban board across all those projects for yourself if you're doing personal Kanban?
Well, okay, so the word personal means items of personal value, not necessarily Kanban for just one person. Teams can have a personal Kanban. And so what I would say is that's very contextual. So if I'm me, and I'll just go ahead and bring our board up again really quickly. In essence, each one of these colors in our board is a project. So the green thing is client work, and the blue stuff is stuff for our Kaizen camps, and the dark blue is writing. And if we go over here, we'll see the bigger backlog where we actually have some of these things broken out into stuff that will come up, much later. So you can definitely have multiple projects on one board. What I would suggest for most teams, though, is that if you are a team and you have a project and 100% of that team is on the other projects, you should probably have a different board for each project. Though the one word of advice, though, is to make sure that you don't have work in progress limits that compound, and that you avoid hidden work in progress as much as possible. So we find quite often that people will set a WIP limit and they'll stick to it, and then they'll start working, and you'll look at them and you'll say, "What are you working on?" And they're like, "Blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Is that on the board?" No, that's not on the board. So we engage in a lot of hidden WIP. And some of it's appropriate and some of it isn't.
Okay. We got another question here. What is the typical size of a project team?
We have worked with successful Kanban teams from 1 person to 150 people. The nature of communication of teams changes as the number of people in the team also changes. But that doesn't mean that from time to time you won't have a very large project. Scrum and Agile like to say 6 ± 2. That's a nice thing to say because it's simple, but it rarely conforms to reality. So with the Kanban, thanks for letting everybody know. With the Kanban, what we're doing is we are visualizing the work of the group so that more people know more things all the time. And that allows us to expand the size of the tolerable size of the group. I like working in groups that are somewhere around, 5 or 6 people, simply because it's collegial, it's conversational, and things can move very quickly. But we've worked on things like, SAP implementation, and I mean, you can't even plug SAP in with 4 people. It's something that it requires an army because it's so unwieldy. And when I was a consulting engineer and I was doing environmental impact statements, I would have teams of 70 or 80 people, working on an environmental impact statement. And, some of those teams might have been broken up into smaller teams, but they still had to know everything that was going on. So optimal teams, super hyper optimal teams, probably going to be around 4 or 5 people, like you're in a band. But don't be afraid to make a team as large as it absolutely needs to be. Just like with the contracting, ask yourself what information needs to be exchanged such that people can do their jobs effectively, and what is the least cost way to deliver that information. So sometimes that might be a Kanban, and sometimes it might not. And there are many, many times where your visual control will look very different than these things.
Okay.
The goal is to visualize the work, not necessarily to visualize it this way.
All right, thanks a lot, Jim. I'm going to sneak one last question in here because if somebody didn't ask it, I was going to. What are you using for your electronic storyboard?
This is LeanKit. I'll do this to, oh, I guess I can't see it. You can't see it. Oh, you can see it up in the URL. So it's leankit.com, and this is the most, this allows you to build the most complex boards. So like you saw with ours, here, bring it up one more time, that we have a variety of swim lanes for different projects or different things of value. You can assign things to different people. You can call this up. You can, come on. Well, if it let me. This is the curse of the demo, right? But underneath this board, there is there it is. There's a subboard which has the tasks that go with this particular action. So Patty right now is doing stuff on one of our websites, and those were the individual tasks that she was doing on that. So this does a nice job of letting you nest things, give people different responsibilities, build boards that watch other boards. So if you're a manager and you have 5 or 6 projects, you could have one board that would show you the status of all of those projects, while the boards underneath that told people the exact tasks or the exact user stories they were working on. We like it a lot.
All right, thanks so much, Jim. Well, we're out of time, so I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. We are going to be posting this video as well as the slides on our website at ocio.wa.gov/agile-fridays. And I believe, Jim, are you going to be back again for another presentation?
I sure hope to be. This is fun.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Yeah, bye, everyone.